Yeah, that was a lovely way to introduce this class. For those who are listening on YouTube, we just listened to a presentation of Liszt's. Maya, remind me of the title of Liszt's beautiful piece that we just listened to.
Well, it's from the Dante Symphony from 1856, and the piece you just heard was a closing composition that he dedicated to Paradise. It's just called the Magnificat.
Right, and that is something you will have heard in the introduction to the video. And if people want to listen to the full recording, they can just click on the link in the description box. Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Rising Tide Foundation Sunday Lecture, where we are continuing our exploration on the topic of storytelling, myth-making, and universal history. We've had a fun break with the naive idea of linear time over the past weeks, where just last week we were reviewing the wonderful thesis by Dr. Raj Vidam regarding ancient India and the truth enwrapped in the mythologies and allegories of the Vedas, which involved debunking a lot of sacred cows, so to speak, that have been holding on to the mythos of an Aryan invasion and all of these other fallacies that have been really withholding some higher truths from the light of day. Before that, we were looking at presentations of Miguel Cervantes, of Homer, of the ancient Chinese classics. So it's a very fun bouncing around, but really we're always zeroing in at the same general theme of humanity and the universe, how we are coming to know the universe, and how through great literature, when looked at from a specific way, we see that we are learning more about the inner universe of ourselves. And it's by coming to know ourselves that we are better placed to make judgments about the objective universe that we were born and created into. And all great artists from different cultures of the world are all tuned to that reality, as we've been discovering. I don't think anybody displays an insight into that uncovering of the human heart better than Dante Alighieri. So I'm really happy today that our good friend Maya Steppenberg, who is an incredible professor of comparative literature. She's an expert on French literature, on French language and French literature, as well as the Russian language and Russian literature, has been teaching at Dawson College for over 12 years and has recently published a book. Recently, it's a really fun book that Cynthia and I have read called Against Nihilism, Nietzsche Meets Dostoevsky. And other projects are in the works. So I'm not going to go through her full bio. It's there on the website. I think people have had a chance to look at it, and Maya is a good friend. So I'm really happy that Maya volunteered her time today to showcase a dimension of Dante's mind that a lot of people have not really taken into consideration. So I think, Maya, thank you so much, and I'll just leave the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Matt, for that very kind introduction. I hope we have good audio, and I hope you enjoyed the music. That was supposed to be the best possible introduction, the wonderful music by Liszt. Yeah, I guess since we were talking about languages and credentials, I don't actually have any Italian. I do have Spanish also. I guess my only claim to Italian is, having lived for 7 years in Argentina, which is half Italian. And therefore, I feel like I've sort of soaked up a lot of secondhand Italian culture by living in Argentina, which is the landscape of my heart. There's a joke about Argentines that they think they're English, they happen to speak Spanish, but they're really Italian, something like that. They're Italians who happen to speak Spanish who think they're English. I think that's maybe the better way of telling that joke. Okay, so yeah. I'm Maya Steppenberg, and I, like all good DJs, I like to sort of have a certain mystery, which is why I actually had a picture on my own Zoom hosting thing that normally shows some idea of what I look like, but I guess you'll just have to wonder what it is for the space of this next hour or so. Yeah, so I'd like to talk with you today about an intriguing connection that I've seen between one book I have loved teaching for a little over a decade now, and another book that I cannot claim to know as well, but certainly admire for its mystery and power just as much. Do we have good audio? I just want to make sure because that's all we have. I just want to make sure that
Yeah,
it
you're coming
good audio.
through. You're coming through loud and clear.
Okay, terrific. Thanks. Okay, so I'd like to speak with you today about the last text in Dante Alighieri's masterful trilogy, Paradise. The culmination of the journey this poet wrote 700 years ago in a book he called simply La Commedia. The adjective divina was added later. And I'd also like to talk about an apocryphal book of the New Testament from roughly 2,000 years ago called the Wisdom of Sirach, or the Book of Wisdom. What they have in common is an unusually explicit acknowledgement of a woman or a female figure embodying and upholding the supreme virtue and excellence of wisdom. I say unusually because of the misogyny that has defined and distorted so much of human history. So it is refreshing indeed to find voices further back in time bearing witness to what may be called a woman's special role or prerogative in improving human life or showing the way to human spiritual evolution. Dante Alighieri, by immortalizing a real flesh and blood woman from Florence called Beatrice in the story of La Commedia, is one such witness to one woman's transformative power in his own life. The unknown author of the other book, the Book of Wisdom, by personifying wisdom as a she, who proceedeth only from God and is procured by prayer, accompanied by justice, is another such witness. Yes, the she in the biblical text is more abstract, but no less abstract, I would argue, than the she at the center of the Song of Songs. Both the Book of Wisdom and the Song of Songs would be unintelligible without the specifically female voice or female presence deliberately introduced to convey a deeper and broader significance well beyond the patriarchal confines or concerns of both Old and New Testaments alike. So just to contextualize a bit, there are two kinds of writing in the Judeo-Christian tradition from between 200 BC to 100 AD: apocalyptic and apocryphal. Both are rejected to a large extent by the Jewish canon today, and to some extent accepted by the Christian canon today. Apocryphal refers to texts that weren't accepted as part of the Christian scriptures until later. The Book of Wisdom, or the Wisdom of Sirach, as it's also known, is an apocryphal addition to the New Testament. The Book of Wisdom is not in the Jewish canon, but rabbis still refer to it, not as a text with authority, but as a text with smart things to say. Because if you recognize a text formally, then you're beholden to it, and you have to incorporate it. So the Book of Wisdom is respected, but not integral to Judaism. However, in Christianity, the Book of Wisdom is more integral because, among other things, it is thought to contain many prophecies of Christ's coming, passion, resurrection, and other Christian mysteries. Basically, wisdom in the Old Testament becomes Christ in the New Testament. This book of wisdom was written in a time much like today, an age of syncretic ideas, thanks to the common lingua franca of Greek back then, which had unified so much of the ancient world after Alexander. Okay, so I'd like to begin by mentioning a specific link between the Book of Wisdom and Dante's Commedia, as one very wonderful Dante scholar already put it. In his 2014 series of published Yale lectures called Reading Dante, Giuseppe Mazzotta observed that there is a key aesthetic reason for the sophisticated structure and rhyme scheme of Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, with, he calls, the number 3 predominating as the fundamental symbolic number within this text. That's obvious actually to anyone. And that reason, he says, can be found crystallized in a verse from the Book of Wisdom. That verse is like this: "You, O God, have created everything according to number, measure, and weight." So everything that Dante artistically attempts in all three great poems is what Mazzotta calls a reflection of that superior divine order of the universe. A reflection, in other words, of how much all three afterworlds that Dante imagined of the dead would correspond to a threefold idea of creation. Justice is what moved my exalted maker, proclaims the gate into Dante's hell in Canto 3 of Inferno. I was the invention of the power of God, of his wisdom, and of his primal love. Divine justice, then, and divine wisdom, and divine love. All three created heaven and hell and purgatory in between, not to mention the whole of the earth for still living souls. So everything for artistic and theological and philosophical reasons revolves for Dante around the number 3. Now, I'd just like to say that the way that the feminine enters into both the biblical and the poetic imagination here is so fascinating because it serves as a mystical intimation of truth, a mystical confirmation of how and why both man and woman are made in God's image, but suggesting further the particular mystical dispensation that is given to the woman in order to approach the divine or to illuminate the way to the divine for the man. In the Book of Wisdom, there is an I, a first person, purporting to speak in the person of Solomon the king and penitent. In the Divine Comedy, there is an I again, right? First person purporting to speak in the voice of Dante, the poet and pilgrim. In both texts, they appeal to the figure of a woman to clarify what the biblical author calls the excellence of wisdom, the means to obtain it, and the happy fruits it produces. This is a close mirroring of what the Italian author identifies as the purpose of all three poems, to exchange poor human reason for greater godly revelation of wisdom, and thereby bringing the reader from a state of misery to a state of happiness. It would seem then that neither of these male narrators could have conveyed or understood anything at all without the singular woman's part in it. Okay, so now I'd like to move to considering who was Dante's Beatrice, because this is very, very, very important to try to establish. And the best way to do that is not to look at the Divine Comedy, but the book that he wrote immediately before that. It's been called the first full work that Dante writes, a text that ends with a vision, leaving the reader in a kind of suspension. This first work was the Vita Nova, or Nuova. The title means a new life, but as Giuseppe Mazzotta again helpfully tells us, besides new, the Italian Nuova means surprising, unexpected, even strange, novel, marvelous. And this variety of meanings gives a certain direction to the way in which we should read the book. Primarily, Mazzotta tells us, we have to accept that all of these meanings are true. And I couldn't agree more, because it's certainly that kind of a text. Because it's in this admittedly strange little book that Dante's Beatrice first makes her formal appearance in a series of remembered glimpses and visions, culminating in the last, most mysterious and evocative vision of all. All right? So, Beatrice Portanari. She lived and died between 1266 and 1290. She was an ordinary secular woman whom Dante endows with extraordinary spiritual significance. She was not a recognized saint by any means, but in the Vita Nuova, Dante takes pains to establish that Beatrice, although a secular woman, was one destined virtually from birth for a special existence. The bare facts, another scholar says, are these. And I quote from the British scholar Prue Shaw in her 2014 study called Reading Dante from Here to Eternity. I think that's quite a funny subtitle. Makes me think of, that Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr on the beach, but actually has nothing to do with it. So she says, the Vita Nuova tells us that in his 9th year, Dante met Beatrice, who was also 9 years old at the time. that he met her again at 18, that on a later occasion she cut him dead in the street, causing him great pain, that he resorted to a subterfuge in order not to appear to be gazing at her in church, that he had disturbing dreams, that the father of Beatrice died, and that her own death at 24 was deeply distressing to him. Such a skeletal record scarcely shows the true meaning of this one woman's lingering impact on him, however. The Vita Nuova records Dante's ever-expanding awareness of something strongly mystical transpiring for him, specifically as a result of his fleeting acquaintances with her, a passing knowledge that quickly surpasses all understanding, because each meeting with her was indeed nuovo, surprising, unexpected, strange, marvelous. Each encounter with Beatrice was tantamount to a powerful mystical experience for Dante of the divine. So here is Dante's account from the Vita Nuova of the impact of his first meeting with Beatrice, recalled in mystical terms, a life-altering meeting in childhood. Okay, so I'm gonna quote from what he wrote, and then I'm gonna comment briefly because sometimes it seems to require a bit of a translation. Okay, so Dante says, 9 times the heaven of the light had revolved in its own movement since my birth, and had almost returned to the same point when the woman whom my mind beholds in glory first appeared before my eyes. Okay, so that means about a month before Dante's 10th birthday. Traditionally, the date of their first meeting is said to be May 1st. He sees Beatrice for the first time. Okay, Dante goes on to say the following. She was called Beatrice by many who did not know what it meant to call her this. And that's because Beatrice means blessed, or the beatifier. Dante goes on. She had lived in this world for the length of time in which the heaven of the fixed stars had circled 1/12 of a degree towards the east. Thus she had not long passed the beginning of her 9th year when she appeared to me, and I was almost at the end of mine when I beheld her. This is a long preamble. Dante was born under the sign of Gemini, sometime between the 21st of May and the 21st of June in 1265. Beatrice was born in January in 1266. So that's why, their birthdays don't coincide. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Dante says she was dressed in a very noble color, a decorous and delicate crimson. So I want to pause here on this color. The color red, specifically vermilion, is associated with a certain power in Byzantine iconography. It substitutes as for gold, but it's also associated with the female figure of wisdom. And wisdom as a woman in Christian Orthodox icons is quite often clothed in red, either standing behind one of the evangelists, guiding his hand to paint her right, or standing between Christ and his Holy Mother as he is crowning her, the Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven. So the color red in iconography is also uniquely associated with one other woman, of course, Mary Magdalene, the penitent and confidant of Christ. So this creates a link or a question mark. Must not wisdom as a woman be likewise love as a woman, since the color crimson or vermilion pertains to both? So, okay, so Dante continues. The moment I saw her, they're both 9 years old, I say in all truth that the vital spirit which dwells in the innermost depths of the heart, and that I would say is the third person of the Trinity, the giver of life, the Holy Spirit, this vital spirit began to tremble so violently that I felt the vibration alarmingly in all my pulses, even the weakest of them. So Dante and Beatrice experiences this first mystic vision, the invisible world breaking into the visible with grace and power, the descent of the God of love. As the vibration trembled, he says, it uttered these words, and it's in Latin. Okay, it's a dead language. My Latin is not great. Bear with me. I think it's Ecce Deus fortior me, qui vienens dominabitur mihi, which means, behold, a God more powerful than I, who comes to rule over me. And then, speaking especially to the spirits of vision, Dante says, he hears again this pronouncement, again in Latin, apparuit iam beatitudo vestra. Now your source of joy has been revealed. And from then on, Dante tells us, indeed, love ruled over my soul. So romantic. He's just 9 years old, imagine. So Dante's second encounter, I'm only going to tell you about three because three's a charm, three's a magic number in the Commedia. But three reminiscences, separate ones he has of Beatrice in the Vita Nuova are very interesting. And when he talks about the second encounter, it's also interesting. It occurs in young adulthood, exactly 9 years later, he says, at exactly the 9th hour of the day. He recalls that she was walking between two other women of distinguished bearing, both older than herself, and as Dante stood on the same street, in fear and trembling, he says, she turned her eyes towards him and with her ineffable courtesy greeted him. As this was the first time she had ever spoken to me, Dante says, I was filled with such joy that, my senses reeling, I had to withdraw from the sight of others. And in the privacy of his room, he began to think of this gracious person, and that's what he called it. Another mystic vision ensues, this time of a cloud, the color of fire, which he again identifies with love. And this inspires him to write his first sonnet. Love and wisdom combine in his mind to first guide his hand in poetry, but it will require years of struggling and stumbling before he can discern and make fuller sense of his poetic vocation, which he decides to consecrate in a higher and greater direction only after Beatrice has died. All right, so here's how Dante reflects more fully on the mystical meaning of Beatrice's presence in his life in relation to the time of her death. So this is the third and last reminiscence, although there are others, many more in the Vita Nuova. This is the third one. Now, he says, according to the Arabian way of reckoning time, her most noble soul departed from us in the 9th hour of the 9th day of the month. Why this number 9 was so closely connected with her might be explained as follows. Since, according to Ptolemy and according to Christian truth, there are 9 moving heavens, and these heavens affect the earth below according to their conjunctions, this number was associated with her to show that at her generation, that is to say her birth, all 9 of the moving heavens were in perfect conjunction one with the other. This is one reason, he says. That's, an astrological received idea of the time. But, he says, thinking more deeply and guided by infallible truth, I say that she herself was this number 9. I mean this as an analogy, as I will explain. The number 3, Dante goes on to say, is the root of 9 because, independent of any other number, multiplied by itself alone, it makes 9. Therefore, if 3 is the sole factor of 9, and the sole factor of miracles is 3, that is Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, who are 3 in 1, then this lady was accompanied by the number 9 to convey that she was a 9. That is a miracle, of which the root, that is, of the miracle is nothing other than the miraculous Trinity itself. And he ends this speculation with saying, well, this is how I choose to see it. Someone else can, reach their own conclusions, but this is how I prefer to understand what's going on. So I like to cite from another very appealing Dante scholar, Rod Dreher, who wrote a book published in 2015 called How Dante Can Save Your Life, the life-changing wisdom of history's greatest poem. Because what he says about numbers and the medieval way of thinking is very helpful. So he calls 3 the magic number, and he says that people in the medieval world, like Dante, believed that a rationally ordered universe, as measured by numbers, revealed the mind of God. In the universe he created, in the Commedia, Dante enshrined 3, the number of the Holy Trinity. And Dante invented a poetic form called terza rima, tercets, or 3-line verses, each one linked in rhyme to the next, like a golden chain binding his creation. I think that's so lovely, the way Mr. Dreher put it. 33 Italian syllables. So in making his universe, Dante sought to imitate God, whose rationality pervades all that is, who leaves nothing to chance, and through whom all things are united. I thought that was just so lovely. I had to put that as a coda to Dante's going to raptures over the number 9 and 3 and so on. So, in the whole of the Vita Nuova, Dante labors to capture the stages of his mystical understanding in a series of sonnets and meditations, praising Beatrice and comparing her increasingly and finally to Christ, the embodiment of wisdom, until he concludes with his last marvelous vision, stated as received but not described, because in the wake of receiving it, Dante resolved, he says, choosing his words very carefully, to write no more of this blessed one until I could do so more worthily. And to this end, I apply myself as much as I can, as she indeed knows. I think that's just a remarkable statement of devotion, intimacy, and religious humility shrouded in mystic silence. Thus, Dante says, if it shall please him by whom all things live, that my life continue for a few years, I hope to compose concerning her what has never been written in rhyme of any woman. He raises his own poetic standard as high as he can, as high as he hopes it can go. He writes this promise to honor her in the 1290s, shortly before he enters the world of Florentine politics and is forced into exile. So he will indeed be given the last 14 years of his life to make good on that promise by dedicating himself entirely to the composition of the Commedia, wherein Beatrice becomes a leading character with a large speaking role, most spectacularly in Paradiso. And then the last sentence of the Vita Nuova is this: and then may it please him who is the Lord of courtesy, that my soul may go to see the glory of my lady, that is, of the blessed Beatrice, who now in glory beholds the face of him qui est per omnia saecula benedictus, who is forever blessed. Okay, so that's how the Vita Nuova ends. Beatrice's earthly story ends there in order to make way for her heavenly story, which begins in the Divine Comedy. And she is first mentioned in the second canto of Inferno. After Virgil discovers Dante lost in the dark wood, famously, Virgil explains how Beatrice came to Dante's aid, actually descending from heaven to hell in order to reach Virgil at all. And her first words convey all her graceful courtesy and all her loving concern. After greeting Virgil with marked respect for his skill in song, she says, as a poet, she implores him to help a friend almost too far lost, because, as she declares, Beatrice am I, who thy good speed beseech, love that first moved me from the blissful place, now moves my speech. It is love that first moves and makes possible the drama of Dante's salvation. Love is the first of the three divine movers in Dante's poetic universe. Dante has been said to be revolutionary for his exaltation of human love as the most effective route to God. And Beatrice was that human gateway for him to the divine by virtue of his love for her and her love for him. Dante never retracted his remarkable argument that through human love one could reach the plenitude of the beatific vision, which, at the end of the Divine Comedy, is the vision vouchsafed for him of the brilliant countenance of God, God, the source of all love and goodness, the author and architect of all. By the end of the poem, having traversed the wheels of heaven and the mountain of purgatory and the woeful valley of Inferno, the reader, together with Dante, understands the famous last line, that it is love that moves the sun and the other stars. Heaven is infused by God's primal love, just as hell is revealed as the human consequence of the inability to love. Purgatory in between, of course, this is where Beatrice makes her full appearance towards the end. And it's worth pointing out that love has a particular emphasis and function in purgatory, perhaps more than anywhere else. Because for Dante the poet in the Commedia, love is the mainspring of all human action, whether good or bad, praiseworthy or damnable. This is a very interesting claim. But Dante the pilgrim comes to understand this only halfway through his journey when he asks Virgil to explain love to him midway up the mountain of purgatory. And I'm not going to dwell on it now, but it's very interesting because in Virgil's explanation, love is no longer just romantic emotion or sexual passion linking two individuals. Desire is seen as a fundamental category of human experience, the driving force behind all human interaction with the world. It is the engine of moral agency, as Prussia put it. And purgatory is the school for relearning the right human relationship to love by seeking to emulate more and more the divine model and origin of all love. So I think purgatory is not as everybody should read purgatory, not just stop at Inferno. So many people they just stop at Inferno as if that's all there is. But purgatory and paradise, so crucial to making sense of the bigger picture. Okay, so now let me turn to the Book of Wisdom and its similar insistence on the woman as the mysterious vehicle. The Book of Wisdom, like any book considered part of the Bible, uncovers a supernatural value through supernatural logic. I guess supernatural, slight difference. Supra meaning like above and not just, I don't know, it sounds better than super. Supernatural sounds spooky like ghosts. I meant supernatural. The supernatural is something closer and more comprehensible to the medieval world of Dante. The natural and the supernatural are not, for the medieval mind, two separate dimensions. They are simply two different ways of looking at the same thing. We as modern people have lost, by and large, the medieval capacity for understanding the world as something more than physical. But any religious understanding of the world at all takes as axiomatic the profound interdependence of heaven and earth. So just because I love this guy so much, I can't resist. I already quoted him about hell is the inability to love. That's Dostoevsky. So from the Brothers Karamazov, of course, I have to tell you what he has to say in this connection. And it's this: much on earth is hidden from us. But to make up for that, we have been given a precious mystic sense of our living bond with the other world, with the higher heavenly world, and the roots of our thoughts and feelings are not here, but in other worlds. God took seeds from different worlds and sowed them on this earth, but what grows, lives, and is alive only through the feeling of its contact with other mysterious worlds. Yeah. I don't think any public talk is complete on any topic unless Dostoevsky is part of it. My private pension. Okay, so let me get back to the Book of Wisdom. The Book of Wisdom begins by asserting the rightness of the worlds God created. For God made not death. He created all things for health. For justice is perpetual and immortal. Those are quotations from chapter 1 of the Book of Wisdom. The wisdom and justice of God is revealed in all of creation. Whatsoever the Lord pleased, he hath done, as the Psalm says, Psalm 135, in heaven, in earth, in the sea, and in all the deeps. For the first author of beauty made all those things: fire, wind, stars, water, sun, moon. That's chapter 6 of the Book of Wisdom. For the first 6 chapters, the biblical writer attributes all goodness and all power that we can know to God and to God alone. Perfectly medieval. Perfectly what we as modern people would do well to remember. Then in the 7th chapter of the Book of Wisdom, the figure of the woman enters. Wisdom is the greatest treasure available to all human beings, and wisdom is personified as a woman. I preferred her before kingdoms and thrones, and esteemed riches nothing in comparison of her. This is chapter 7, lines 8 through 9. Gold and silver are just sand and clay next to wisdom, it's said there. The truest wealth lies in spiritual riches and spiritual truths, which only wisdom reveals. Wisdom, the writer of the Book of Wisdom says, is the worker of all things and more active than all active things. So this suggests the mystery of quickening, the origin of life. For in her is the spirit of understanding, described variously in a long stream of adjectives, ranging from sure, sweet, loving, that which is good, to gentle, kind, steadfast, and intelligible, pure, subtle. So wisdom as a spirit of understanding is similarly extolled in the book of Proverbs, since we are called to recognize and respond to the same higher reality. For, as it said there, if you scream for insight and call loudly for understanding, if you pursue it like you would money and search it out as you would hidden treasure, then the Lord will be awesome to you and you will come into possession of the knowledge of God. Arguably, that's what Dante achieved, some possession of the knowledge of God and the accompaniment of his muse, his everything, this very mysterious woman, Beatrice. Now, having chosen wisdom above all other things, the author of the Book of Wisdom elaborates more fully on her beauty and power. And in order to convey this, the author employs the poetic language of love. I loved her above health and beauty and chose to have her instead of light, for her light cannot be put out. This is chapter 7, line 10. The woman wisdom fulfills a desire for greater illumination, for more and more light of understanding. Much like in the Song of Songs, the woman is a metaphor for desire. God is the name of my desire, Tolstoy once said, and thus confirms and calls to all souls' love for God and desire for reunion with him. Far from serving as a passive, empty cipher, the woman's role in this revelation is crucial and active. She stands as a gateway to understanding because she is precisely the worker of all things and reacheth everywhere by reason of her purity. So what nature is this light that cannot be put out associated with the woman wisdom? The author goes on. She is the brightness of eternal light and the unspotted mirror of God's majesty and the image of his goodness. This is the uncreated light, I would say, before the creation of the world. So she's an angelic being or emanation or reflection of the Godhead. This corresponds very exactly to the ever-increasing illumination that Dante describes as his experience of paradise, since the amount of light at first hurts and overwhelms his eyes, but under Beatrice's guidance, he gradually learns to adapt to it. In the first canto of Paradiso, Dante notices Beatrice looking straight at the sun. And so he gazed at the sun too. In a way, we don't, he says, on earth, because he's not on earth anymore. He's left. He's in the first sphere of heaven. Until suddenly, he says, it seemed that to full daylight again had been added, as if he who can had put another sun in the sky. So seeing is understanding. Love follows from understanding. And the verb vedere, to see, is used more frequently than any other verb in Paradiso. The word occhio, eye, is the most frequently used word in the poem, followed closely by the word mondo, world. So after his eyes get adjusted to the brightness in the same first canto, Dante says to himself, O love which controls the heavens, you know who lifted me up with your light. So this is probably, you know who is Beatrice. Okay, so of what nature is this image of goodness and majesty associated with the woman wisdom? The author of the Book of Wisdom is very clear. This woman is indescribably beautiful, beyond the powers of human speech to adequately convey. She is, the author says, more beautiful than the sun, and above all, the order of the stars. Being compared with the light, she is found before it. For after this cometh night, but no evil can overcome wisdom. Her beauty is thus the highest conceivable expression of moral beauty. And as Dante ascends through all nine heavens with Beatrice, her person is invested with more and more dazzling beauty, which he labors to convey. Dante is increasingly helpless at the mercy of the limitations of language in this last and most brilliant kingdom of the dead that he imagines. And so he acknowledges Beatrice as helping to express the inexpressible. Dante, who had acknowledged the influence of Virgil only in his style at the beginning in Inferno, now credits Beatrice and Paradiso with his content. Si cominciò Beatrice questo canto. Thus, Beatrice began this canto, he says in Canto 5 of Paradise. Così Beatrice com'io scrivo. So Beatrice to me as I write. A little later again in Canto 5 of Paradise. Because, for lack of better words, he admits that Beatrice is she who imparadises my mind, queja que imparadisa la mia mente. The one means by which she was prepared, as Beatrice says, made ready like a candle for the flame, because she alone brought him from servitude to liberty, who for his salvation submitted to leave the print of her feet in hell. So I'd like to close with Joan Ferrante and her thoughts on Beatrice in the quite glorious Dante Encyclopedia, first published in 2000 and happily reissued in 2010. If you look in what she wrote for Beatrice in that encyclopedia, she's made a lot of wonderful observations, including this claim. Ferrante claims that the most astounding and revolutionary significance that Dante bestows on his Beatrice is a clear identification of her with Christ. In the Commedia, she descends to hell, as Christ did, to appeal to Virgil to rescue him. And one of the three cries that heralds her appearance at the top of Mount Purgatory is a direct echo of Christ's entry into Jerusalem. Benedictus qui venis. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. A surprising masculine form, making the identification with Christ strikingly clear. It's not Benedicta, it's Benedictus. Another thing she points out is how Beatrice even speaks Christ's words to her attendants, as Christ did to his disciples, before leaving purgatory with Dante for paradise. Okay, so modicum e non vitabitis me, e iterum, my beloved sisters, modicum e vos vitabitis me. A little while and you shall not see me, and again a little while and ye shall see me. Right? So this is quite remarkable, I think. Her very nickname in Paradise, Bice, this is in Canto 7 of Paradise, evokes the abbreviation of Christ's name. You see in manuscripts. So Be, Beato, blessed, and Ice. The IC stands for Iesu Christo, right? Jesus Christ. So I'd like to also, no tribute to Dante could be complete without remembering the work of the late great Dorothy Sayers. And she said it wasn't for nothing that Beatrice's first words to Dante are expressed in the first person plural to emphasize a kind of twinning with Christ. Look on us well. We are Beatrice, she says. That's how she chose to translate the line. It's closest to the original Italian. Other translators generally think that must be a mistake and make it a singular. I am Beatrice, but it's actually we. And having said that, Sayers says, she has said everything. But there's more. Sayers, in her notes to her translation of Purgatorio, observes that Beatrice's grand entrance so late in Dante's trilogy is deliberately mysterious. This is what she says about it. It's not said how or whence Beatrice appears, like the presence of Christ in the Eucharist. She is here, we know not how. She is first seen veiled, like the host covered by the corporeal, and the colors of her dress are the colors of the three theological virtues: red for charity or love, white for faith, green for hope. I always like to mention those are also the colors of the Italian flag, which Garibaldi must have had in mind when a little bit later when Italy became a unified state. And Sayers says her crown of olive, Minerva's tree, signifies, of course, wisdom. So Christ is wisdom, and Beatrice is Christ for Dante. So Beatrice is wisdom. That's about all I thought I could bring to this conversation today. So I thank you, and I'm interested in what you think. Grazie.
That was beautiful, Maya. Really, really great. I didn't even know about the Book of Wisdom until this class right here. I feel a little bit ashamed and also excited that there's something new to explore. Also, the connection between La Vita Nuova and the Comitia. I hadn't thought about it the way you framed it as well. That the Vita Nuova features Beatrice in life and ends with her the end of her mortal frame, as Comitia picks up with the beginning of her spiritual existence. Really interesting. So yeah, there's a lot to work with there. I'll just I told people in the chat box that, like usual, if people have a question or a thought they would like to share, to put your name in, ideally, if something is really pressing. Now's the time to throw a question out. I have a thought and a question as well, but I'll let other people, if they're everyone is on mute, by the way.
Matt, I guess I have a question. It's Cynthia here. Hi. Hey, Maya.
Hey, Cynthia, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for a terrific lecture. My question is, I guess, a little bit off the mark, but since it's your passion, I thought it would be a fine question to ask, and it's somewhat related. I read Dostoevsky's The Idiot, and I don't understand what Dostoevsky was trying to do with the ending of The Idiot. I thought I understood it until he ended it the way he did. It might not be an appropriate time to talk about that now, but if you think you can bring it up, otherwise I can think up of a different question to ask that's more relevant.
Well, actually, that's an interesting bridge to make, because, of course, the meanings of the names that Dostoevsky chooses for his characters are never accidental. And Nastasia Filipovna dies at the end, and yet her name means resurrection, right? Anastasis. In other words, if Christ is supposed to be resurrected, and this question of Beatrice being like a female Christ, then it's kind of strange and suggestive that Dostoevsky perhaps makes a failed female Christ in Nastasia Filipovna, in sort of a Magdalene, fallen, doomed from the start. And the Virgin, of course, is not her, it's Rogozhin, because his first name, Parfyon, is related to an ancient Greek word for virginity, and Rog, for the cuckold's horns. And of course, Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin, the mouse and the lion together, the contradiction. So that kind of, I guess, what's always going on in Dostoevsky narratives is, there's that kind of, I guess you could call it a strong drama generated between the two male leads, the two heroes, the hero, anti-hero. It's the action is most kind of palpable, and the meaning most like the brotherhood they swear, exchanging crosses, and how one is dark and the other is light, and this is something he does later in Wieczny Mórz with, I mean, he does it all the time. So and so the woman at the end, why is she sacrificed? Why is it such an unsatisfying ending? He tried to write this book 8 times, Dostoevsky, and so it's like the tragic ending as opposed to the happy ending of the Commedia, where there's a sense of restoration and innocence regained, and enlightenment of a huge cosmic kind, and certainly harmony, whereas the ending of the Idiot is right. Idiot Mishkin himself is supposed to be a kind of Christ. So so it's all swimming around, and Dostoevsky considered the ending good finally, because it put him in mind of Othello. He said it had to end somehow, and he really struggled with the trajectories of those 3 characters. Yeah, I like to think about the ending myself as because it's so terrible. It's almost like you're in that kind of state of suspense before the resurrection, like before you can have it confirmed to you. That's how the Idiot ends, because it's all just terrible, like everything falling apart, and nothing left to hang on. Everything implodes, So I don't know if that helps, but
yes, it does. And I have a more relevant question now to the beautiful lecture that you just delivered.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I put my foot there. I said I love Dostoevsky, so there it is.
Well, I was saying to Matt, we need to pick Maya's brain over like a meal sometime, but then I decided to just spring it on you. I have another question as to, maybe you could say something a bit as to like what was Italy during the time that Dante was writing this, and he mentions a lot of names of people who are actually still living in his Inferno,
yes.
which is a quite a strong message, and also, what do you think about his mysterious death?
What you mean, Dante's mysterious death?
Yeah, apparently he was killed on his way back from Venice, or to Venice. Do you know the details to that? Or anyway.
Yeah, well, I don't think I think he contracted a kind of fever that I wasn't aware that. I mean, I guess there are all kinds of conspiracy theories, but
Yep.
he did die shortly after completing his work. So it was a kind of, it was a natural death insofar as the time, and but I don't think he was assassinated. Uh, so but what you said about Florence, I think the Prue Shaw book is very good, and so is the Rod Dreher book. They're both very good at sort of taking you back in time to Florence and what it was like. It was a really thriving, rich marketplace, crossroads of money. Lots of money being made hand over fist because of unique opportunities of textiles and coining and all kinds of. It was very exciting. It was like a hub, and so certainly it's true that Dante meets no fewer than 5 Florentines among the thieves in hell, and he meets more than 30 of his fellow, Italians all throughout hell, and just 4 in purgatory, and only 2 in paradise. so there's a kind of right, a kind of over representation of the corruption that he saw of his immediate time, and consigning people he knew, yes, to hell. His own great grandfather is in heaven because he fought in the Crusades. So that's one lucky Italian. But the whole idea of calling out corruption, Dante was really brave in his time because he was unflinchingly naming things going on in the Catholic power structure, putting popes in hell and commenting on popes in the vestibule and all kinds of, even in paradise, you have a very strong condemnation, very high up up there, uh, after he's spoken to many blessed souls, and there's still a righteous rage, against Catholic falling down on the job, that he feels there'll be a time of reckoning, and this won't be able to go on, and they'll have to, right? So anticipating Luther by a good stretch, Dante has already, gone up to bat and made very clear his disappointment, his dissatisfaction, his, the betrayal of those principles.
And was he exiled when he wrote the Divine Comedy, or?
Yes, he was indeed exiled. Yes, and it was a blessing in disguise, because it was only this kind of rupture that created, turned everything upside down and removed him from everything that was, he was a real political animal. He was running for office, and he ran afoul of a certain, complicated power struggle between they were called the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and of course a lot of that is also reflected in some of the stuff he talks about in Inferno, especially. So, but yes, the feeling that that his time was teeming with lots of candidates for good, bad, and ugly, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. That's what makes the book really extraordinary. All three of them is that there are individual stories, individual human witnessings of, in just a few lines and in a few images, you hear and you get the sense of a whole life, and their life stories are so poignant, and it's not like just, they're all distinct, they're all individuals, and they all kind of call to you. There's not a single moment when you're reading that you don't feel at some point a very clear identification. So that's part of the artistry, through the particularity of this great universal bridge.
Thank you.
I have a question from John Barr, whose microphone is having difficulties. It's a twofold question. It's pretty good. The first one is, what is the relevance of this? Why are we still interested in this 700 years later? So what is the importance of this now? And also the second part of John's question is, why is the purgatory and heaven so difficult for modern people? Why do they just resonate with the Inferno, and why do they miss out on the purgatory and heaven in your opinion?
Oh, could I answer the second one first?
Sure.
Yeah, why people don't want to go to purgatory and paradise? Well, because there's a certain glamour in evil, and you just have to turn on any kind of media channel, and you'll see that the serial killer of the month, or some atrocity. I mean, all these things are they're it's unfortunate that people can't understand that this is when Dante conceived this work, it was very clear it was going to be in three parts, and so to short circuit or compromise your experience of what is supposed to be a journey, you have to go down to go up, and so you have to bottom out, and you have to face your demons, and you have to understand that nobody's perfect, all right? That's the first thing, and that all these kinds of varieties of human nature, it's too bad that the entertainment industry has glommed onto and exacerbated or given more press than certainly necessary to monstrous tendencies, pathological tendencies. But the whole poem is actually built very clearly on Aristotelian principles, which emphasize the role of reason, you know, the role of conscious will, and so nobody is just accidentally here. Okay, all of them have this kind of they own up to, they are responsible. That no one else is punishing, or I mean, they're the authors of everything, because only they can do their own actions. So so even at the very, very bottom, with the worst in Inferno, yes, there's a I mean, look at Halloween. It's all about the demonic. It's all there's so much in popular culture that that just tends to get stuck in a kind of defeatism, or a kind of I don't know, a kind of disgust with human nature, you know, when the whole thing is to transcend human nature, and see that you are made in the image of God, and you can pick yourself up, and you can own your actions, and you can make a difference. I mean, the whole possibility of curing yourself of a kind of sickness, right? This is again Aristotle, that the sins are debilitating habits, they're bad habits, and so can you know, learn to acquire a good habit instead? This is a task, right? So the reason why modern people, it's not just modern people, it's been like, you know, a kind of tendency from the beginning to just stop at Inferno, as if that's all you need to know, but it's very much just the first leg of three. And purgatory may be difficult, well, may be difficult to just accept as a possibility, that, you know, you can you can get better if you want to, but it's up to you, right? And so the thing that distinguishes purgatory from Inferno, very simply, is in articulo mortis, in the very moment of death, do you repent, right? And do you feel sorry? Do you realize? Do you have a feeling of understanding the magnitude of, you know, uh, of your actions? That could you, if you could take any of them back, what could you make restitution? Could you, right? In other words, that single motion is the only, that tiny little crack, right? That's the thing that makes all the difference in the fate of the human soul. The human soul has a role in their fate, right? It's not just passive and punishing. It's altogether different, and that's why he's a poet of hope. You see, it's he's a poet of love also, but it's really it's just the beginning, and to not go to not even peek at the remaining two is a great shame. And you know, you're shortchanging yourself, that's all. It's really easy to read purgatory if you just open it and read, because if you can read Inferno, you can certainly read purgatory, and then, you know, it's like easy. So yeah, it's just a question of will. And it was a bestseller in Dante's time, a bestseller, because people then understood too that there's nothing glamorous about evil. There's just sordid suffering. You know, it's something everybody's got to get past and understand how to earn goodness in a more constructive way. To leave isolation and understand how to get back to community.
That's good. And I think that also implicitly also answers the first part of the question too, of the importance of this this work for today. That's good. Well, hold on. Just losing track here. So Vincent, I noticed you have a question. Did you want to pose that?
Sure.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, Maya, thanks for illuminating this subject for us. Yeah, I was curious about, obviously Dante, you know, met Beatrice at a young age, and then my understanding is that he was like he was set up in an arranged marriage, so there was no way that those two could have been together. And then she dies at such a young age. I'm just curious where Dante was, because obviously his experiences, although brief, really impacted on him spiritually on a real deep level. And I'm just curious where he was when that occurred.
You mean where he was spiritually, or where he was like?
No, where he was physically. Like if she died at such a young age, like where was he at? And what, like did he have a reaction? Was he
Oh yes, of course he did. Yes, the whole Vita Nuova goes kind of through his reactions to all the phases of his experience of her, including her death. And so where he was, yeah, like he was married to Gemma Donati. He was an arranged marriage when when he was a kid, and of course Beatrice was also in an arranged marriage to a banker. Everyone was in Florence, right? It was like everybody was still in the same town, and so his reaction originally was great grief and uh, also he sought comfort in the arms of another, as he confesses in the Vita Nuova. He finds a kind of substitute, right, to just sort of console himself in his loss, even though of course he's already married. But that, you know, he never mentions his wife in the Paradiso, and he also parenthetically doesn't mention his father. His mother died when he was small, so some people think, well, this is just a mother fixation on the Beatrice of some kind. I think that's far too simplistic. But anyway, yeah, he was right there, and so the whole phases of coming to terms, discarding, you know, the fake, uh, you know, the, the and he also played the field a lot, you know, like he was not just faithful to this one woman in a spiritual way. I mean, he certainly he was a very successful poet, so he wrote, you know, canzoni, you know, he was the author of the sweet style, which were these kinds of sonnets that were very about romance, you know, the courtly troubadour thing, you know. So it wasn't just theoretical, but he felt with Beatrice he was stopped in his tracks, right? And so whatever like and this is also reflected in the poem, because I could just read you part of it. When Dante and Beatrice are actually reunited in the top of Purgatory, it's not like the romantic happy thing, you know. It's not like love story where they run into each other's arms or something like that. It's extremely like Dante is like really called 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 on his infidelity to her memory. Okay, so as a way of answering your question, it's quite. It also reveals how perfectly, you know, the humanity of Beatrice is conveyed, because she's not happy that she has to complain about him, but the way she complains about him shows that she really, just like any other woman who's been cheated on, even though she's dead, right? She's like, no uncertain terms, right? So so let me just see what. Okay, so here's one translation. Uh, in Purgatory 30, where they're reunited, and she's got that, you know, uh, grand entrance, you know, the white veil, crowned with olive, a lady came to me under her green cloak, clothed in the color of flame. All right. And then her first words are, Dante, weep no more for Virgil's going. Weep no more yet, for you will have to weep presently because of another sword. Okay. Another sword he'll have to, in other words, he'll have to come to terms with another series of trials, even though he's just cleared all the purgatory. Uh, so then she says, look at me well. I am indeed Beatrice. How were you able to climb the mountain? Did you not know that men are happy here? Okay, so she's like, it's almost like she's saying, like, what took you so long to get here, right? And then Dante says, my face fell and I looked at the clear water, but seeing myself in it, switched to the grass. So heavy was the shame on my brow. And then she said nothing, and the angel sang, and so on. And everyone else around is saying, lady, why do you treat him so harshly? And then she says, well, it's like this. This man, in his youthful years, had such possibilities that every propitious tendency would have produced some marvelous result in him. But ground sown with bad seed and not cultivated becomes the more malignant, and overgrown, the more wholesome vigor there is in the soil. For some years I sustained him with my looks, showing my youthful eyes to him. I led him with me in the right direction. as soon as I was upon the threshold of my second age and changed my life, that is to say, as soon as she died, he took himself from me and gave himself to others. And when I had mounted from flesh to spirit, that is when she, went to paradise, and my beauty and virtue had grown greater, because of course that's what happens in heaven. You become just more beautiful, unrecognizably beautiful, and full of light. To him I became less dear and less pleasing, and he turned his steps along an untrue path, following his false appearances of good, which never kept any promise entirely. It was no good my begging for inspiration, which in dreams and in other ways I called him back. Little he cared about that. So low he fell that every remedy was short of what was needed for his salvation, except that of showing him the damned. So Virgil was required to get him to straighten up. For this, I visited the gate of the dead, and to him who has conducted him up here, my prayers with weeping were carried. Okay, so that's why the way she talks is just like any woman would be, who's disappointed that you didn't honor her memory with by being chaste. No, far from it. So I don't know. It's all taking place in Florence, and yeah, it's like it's kind of like this momentous passing. It took him some time to, like I said, to struggle to understand and put in true perspective. And I think the exile is what helped him understand, understand what he never fully understood before.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Magdalena and Jerry. So Magdalena, you want to go first?
Yeah, I guess so. Okay. So thank you, Maya. I know very little about Dante. I know I tried to read the book, I think about twice, and I never got to Paradiso. And I'm sure I'm not the only one.
No, you're not. No.
Now, I just want to know a little bit more about Dante's life. I mean, how, when you think about poems in today's time, poets in today's time, it's not, I mean, we have our musicians, we have our pop singers and so forth, where everybody knows, right? Everybody knows their lyrics, everybody knows their songs and so forth, because of radio and repetition and so forth. How was Dante? How was poetry perceived back when Dante lived? I know you said that he was famous or well known among all stratas of society, or just in the upper echelons, or okay, I'm trying to figure out what impact his writings had on whom.
So you mean sort of like Dante's writings while he was alive as a cultural force?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly there, he had a lot of people were like, he had a lot of followers, right? As I would say today, people were their curiosity was piqued, especially by Inferno, since of course they were looking to recognize real people's names. So there was that kind of gossip factor, I suppose, but also just the whole appeal of the book, because we're looking at poetry, love poetry, it served a different a function, just like literature as a whole it wasn't like just taken for granted. I mean, this idea that there was, I guess the best way of trying to answer your question is, it's very hard for us to, first of all, we don't know that much about the particulars of Dante's life. His biography is, like Shakespeare, that kind of, when you're, the greater the genius, the less kind of strange particulars we can find, to reconstitute the the things we'd most like to know, right? But even the time of so long ago, it's 700 years, and the thing that most surprises me is the sophistication that a medieval reader would bring to virtually anything. They would want to read anything on at least 4 different levels. So there's the literal level, right? And then there's a figurative level that you would be happy to sort of, understand a metaphor, uh, filling out or filling in a meaning. Then there's a kind of allegorical, like a more abstract, like an idea, not just an image. And then of course there's an anagogical level that people, that is to say, they'd want to see a parallel to scripture. They'd want to see that there'd be some kind of biblical allusion that would again enrich their experience. So I don't think it would really matter what kind of text it was, but the more that a book sought to satisfy those kinds of demands in that kind of reader, I think the fact that Divina Commedia was a bestseller tells you a great deal about the time and the kind of taste of the public. So, but we can only glean so much. We can only, I would say, we've lost a great deal. Lost a great deal of patience and understanding, especially for those kinds of levels of meaning. So poetry was, all of the whole Bible is itself poetry. So poetry of a very particular kind, and that don't forget that in writing the Divina Commedia, Dante's aim was to write what he called the fifth gospel. So it was a lofty aspiration, a great ambition, and yet remarkably, it's, I don't know, it's been called the cathedral in verse. That's what it really is. It's like an encyclopedia that captures everything in its time. So the complexity it can be off-putting, but like I always tell my students, it's like a great banquet. You go to a smorgasbord and you have all these great dishes. That doesn't mean you have to eat them all. Just sample. This is a kind of book that you just get a little bit. Try. Sample here and there, a morsel there and a bite here, and you'll, something will nourish and satisfy you. And the more you get used to this kind of, levels of reading, the more enjoyable it is. It's like a puzzle book too, So it's kind of like that. It's a taste we've lost.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you for the encouragement.
Oh yeah, it's beautiful. Sometimes the translations really make a difference. You should find a translation that as close as possible to the original music of the Italian. So French translations succeed better than English. I think Spanish ones, well, sometimes they can vary, but it's interesting. It's a whole separate question how translations can add to or take away. Like Cervantes said, the best translation is still like looking at a beautiful Oriental rug from the other side. So, but we're dealing with an old book, and we're dealing it, more often than not, all of us in translation. So, anything we can appreciate is a gift. It's a great gift across time. Thank you for your question.
Well said. Jerry, you're up.
Yes. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you for the presentation, and also bringing back a lot of memories. It's been a long time since I read the Divine Comedy, and thanks for reminding me the translation of Dorothy Sayers. I forgot about that. I read that. I think the one that I read was the Carey translation. And I do have to apologize, though we read all 3 books. We enjoyed the Inferno the best. We thought it was hilarious. Just seeing the different people, why he put him in hell, and the punishments he gave to him. Oh, I think we read the Inferno a couple times. It was so much fun. I have to apologize for that. But my question is regarding paradise, because I was thinking about Plato and in his dialogue, the Phaedrus, you know, where they have the procession and the chariots.
Oh, yes.
And the gods are allowed to get to the summit and see, you know, the divine realm, heaven, if you want to call it heaven. But the lesser souls are not allowed. They're kind of bobbing up and down and they catch tiny little glimpses. So I'm thinking of Dante is actually allowed into paradise, into heaven, but he needs Beatrice to get there. I mean, Virgil isn't allowed into paradise. And I remember something about that, and I can't remember it, but there's a reason why Dante was allowed into paradise, and there's a reason why it was Beatrice that enabled him to. Do you remember that? Do you have something you can
Oh,
say?
certainly.
Oh, thank you.
Certainly. It, well, I mean, there's many possible answers to your wonderful allusion or an analogy. That is to say, this idea of you know, like of course, seeing the countenance of God. I mean, you're not supposed to be able to survive this. Not even Moses could see this, right? So, how is it that he and this question of how he's allowed, it's not that he's allowed, he's actually expected. I mean, that this is the completion of his education. So you know, in allegorical terms, Virgil is supposed to represent the best of human reason, and human reason and intellect can only take you so far because it's limited, right? Because Virgil himself, all throughout purgatory, you may remember, he's very kind of uncertain. He's kind of, you know, like, I'm not sure, I don't know my way around here. I know all the weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth, that's fine, that's all like, you know, the back of my hand. But this stuff, you know, where people are willingly suffering, and you know, the virtue is supposed to be learned through the penance, and he's very tentative and charming and very human, you know, in purgatory, and even their roles reverse, you know. So Dante's sort of telling Virgil more like where to go next, or sort of idea, you know. So it's very touching, the friendship as it develops. But in other words, Virgil's last lines to Dante at the top of purgatory, when he's going to like hand off the baton, right? And it's Dorothy Sayers who says, like, this is the most daring thing that Dante could have ever attempted to do, to try to like a she compares it to in her notes to an athlete on a trapeze, you know. He takes that breathtaking leap by sucking away Virgil and putting Virgil, like Beatrice, in his place. Is like, what a risk he took as a writer. Because why would the reader want to entertain Virgil? Everybody's got very attached to him. And she points out, like, my God, he gets away with it. So the way he gets away with scooping away Virgil is in a way very key to the way he gets away with Dante having to continue the journey. You see, because of the momentum has been created, the expectation that, well, this can't be the end of the poem, because Beatrice finally just arrived. And so the completion of the education has to be under her auspices. And what she does, which I didn't have a chance to touch on, but she is, of course, allegorically revelation. So she is the vehicle for divine transcendence and mystical understanding, which is altogether, you know, different from the pagan Virgil's experience, right? And so Beatrice has to conduct him. She has to show where he can see her again, because don't you remember in the Vita Nuova, he just said, I hope that I'll be given enough time to finish writing about this blessed one. I'm not worthy enough yet, but at some point, you know, I hope to behold her in heaven, beholding he who, you know, gives life to the world. And so it's almost like she's fulfilling her end, you see, of that promise in the Vita Nuova before he even begins to read the Divina Commedia. And so it has to be fulfilled. It's like a necessary fulfillment, poetically, artistically, because she wants to teach him theology, you see. she teaches him theology all through Paradiso. And so this is her province. And yes, it may not be something that, you know, technically you should be able to do before you're dead. But, you know, he's the only living soul throughout this whole world of ghosts, all three poems. And it's all very consistent, right? It's all very necessary, and the momentum is beautifully, really miraculously sustained and carried off, because Shelley, I think, was the poet who said, of all three poems, it's the most miraculous achievement poetically is Dante's Paradiso, because he makes visible the invisible. He really does. He really does. So I don't know, does that, I mean, that's just my offering of an answer to your very good question.
Yes, that was a wonderful answer. Thank you so much.
Oh, God bless you.
I have a thought, since Jerry raised Plato and the Phaedrus. It sort of resonated with something I had been thinking about during your lecture. So I'm just going to take the prerogative of the moderator and just jump in with a thought to share and maybe partial question. So in honor of the trifold Trinity idea, there were three separate key works by Plato that sort of resonated at different times, at different amplitudes. The main one being the Symposium, where I think this is written in 300 or so BC, or Plato's writing is probably 360 or 370 BC, and it's featuring Diotima, who's a female priestess who Socrates is saying gave him his teaching about the nature of love, regarding the yearning of the soul for the eternal and the immortal.
Yes.
Which sort of, I guess, originates the idea of platonic love that animates a lot of the dialogues. So there was that. And as I was Googling her name, I found that a lot of the renditions and paintings feature her with like a red clothing too.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
Yeah. So that's an interesting idea that she's a teacher of wisdom to somebody who's a synonym of wisdom is Socrates in a lot of people's minds. The other thing was the Republic. So that in that piece, it's like when I was hearing you describing Dante being led by Beatrice to look at the sun in its pure truth. It reminded me of a filling in of some of what was left out in the allegory of the cave in book 7.
The allegory of the cave.
How did he get out? Who let him out of the cave, right? Where he's no longer believing in shadows. And it's sort of like that. And he's looking at the sun, and his eyes are in pain, and he kind of wants to go back in to where he's comfortable, and it takes him a while to adjust to the light. So it seems almost
absolutely. And Plato comes up quite a lot, because Plato had this idea. In fact, Beatrice sort of trots him through this idea that, she's like reading his mind, and she says, I can see you're thinking about Plato, Dante, and you're absolutely wrong that souls do not dwell on stars. It doesn't work like that. For example, So, can someone answer that phone? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I guess that was a call from, Heidegger's idea. Oh, well, I don't know. I don't know what your question raises for me is this whole pagan thing that's going throughout, that enriches and sort of grounds the question of. In other words, the Commedia wouldn't be as much fun to read, and I think people would especially enjoy Inferno as much, unless it had this kind of, all these references to ancient Greek and kind of monsters and mythology and certainly literature, like Ulysses is Inferno too, right? So I don't know. It's certainly. And the question of love, like the Symposium, I think that's also where he talks about divine madness, right? And how you can be possessed by different gods. Is that where Plato
Yeah, well,
talks
yeah,
about that.
yeah. I think that was, I forget whose mouth he has that one go into, but it's, yeah, you have each person at a round table do their different orations over what their hypothesis of love is, and
Yeah.
one of the people introduced that idea. Yeah.
And which one is the best? The best one, Socrates says, is, I think, Eros, right? That
No.
one is
Socrates.
better than the Dionysian, where you, or the one of the Muses, or the one, So
Well, the one that Socrates gets at is that, yeah, it's that true love is a yearning of the soul for the eternal, and he then has that at the end. You have the drunken Alcibiades like barge in and really wants to give erotic satisfaction to Socrates, and he just brushes him off. And he's like, "You always brush me off, Socrates. Why don't you just let me show you love?" And Socrates is like, "That's not love. Like, go away."
yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just the other funny thing is that Dante knew Greek. He knew Greek. So
Right.
it's so everything he knew about the Greek world had to be in Latin translation, and so your question makes me think of that, because clearly, there are many funny moments when he turns to Virgil and he says, "Can't you just tell me this in plain Latin?" And Virgil having to interpret, when he's speaking to certain people like Ulysses, right? So this it came as a shock to me that Dante wouldn't have known Greek. But then, of course, when you think about the world he was in, and so much of the world that we've inherited, the world of learning, has been salvaged by Arab scholars. And that's why, very interestingly, you'll see very much like in Limbo, for example, and Inferno. I think Limbo and Inferno is such an extraordinary innovation that Dante introduces, because it's his way of acknowledging his debt to the entire classical world. I mean, he chose Virgil as his mentor, right? So he could have chosen another person, but I think the fact that he chose this flawed, brilliant, artist, it in other words grounds him in a wider sense of his time, and how much he owed a debt, to, like someone famously, it was a medieval scholar, I can't remember who, he said that we're all dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants, and that's kind of, I think, the role of the pagan world, is a rich legacy that Dante is cognizant of, and grateful for, and he'll always remember. He'll be haunted by Ulysses, for example, because he himself is a latter-day Ulysses. Going on his travels, and he'll always ask, what about this virtuous pagan? How come this person, just because they didn't know Christ in time, or why don't they get a chance? And always the answer is, it's not for us to know. And guess what? You will find this, exception to the rule, or you will find, this pagan in paradise. And so it's not our wisdom that decides salvation. It's up to God, right?
Right.
So it's very nuanced, and I think it's nuanced because of that humble cognizance of minds that came before, minds that came before Christ.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thank you. On the issue of language, that opens up the door to the question that Scott has. Now, Scott, we're running a little bit short on time. I think we have time for maybe two more. Do you have time for maybe three more questions, Maya, or how are you doing?
Sure, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. So, Scott, maybe I know you got a very multiply connected question there, but if you could maybe zero in on your aspect on language. Can you hear me on the vernacular matter? Scott, you there? You might be on mute.
Yeah, I see his text.
Yeah.
He says yes.
Hey there, Scott.
Yeah, just a thought about the vernacular and Dante's work, which I'm very new to, really. But when I hear some of it, the poetry, and I've I've listened to some lectures on it, just pretty amazing. Just gets me thinking, you know, of the time and place. And so the effect, I have just a couple questions, you know, because you know, the role of the church in terms of, you know, shutting down literacy, you know, was so paramount, was so big, you know, for so long. And here you have Florence and you have Dante just openly going against that and trying to create a literate culture. Right. And so it makes you really think of, you know, I just think of his poetry, of their trying to create an experience. I think the Bible was locked out. People were locked out of the beauty in the Bible and the verses, purpose for a long time. And along comes Dante, and the only way that you know the beauty, you know, is in poetry, and he kind of he hits it. He nails it, and he uses it to instill a sense of beauty that can only be done, I think, through poetry, is what I'm getting. And
Absolutely, yeah.
We would have said,
Yeah.
Say again.
Absolutely.
Right, yeah. And so the reverberations, I guess, of that, but just like just the city-state in Florence versus Venice, and I find, you know, he's dealing with both. And it's like an intermediary able to go, you know, Venice is was an empire city-state versus Florence. So anyway, do you have any comment about that and his effect on just, you know, maybe later effects of the liberation, what ultimately led? I just think of like King James Bible, like we just kind of take it for granted that, you know, we can, you know, have the word of God or beautiful ideas of God, and you know, and a direct experience. And I think Dante is kind of like the first King James kind of experience for people. So just you could comment on that.
Oh, well, yeah, I really hear and appreciate your endorsement of poetry to, you know, poets are the legislators of the world, right? The unsung legislators of the world. So certainly it's the poets who understand, and, you know, mysteriously, right? It's and the vernacular was a very conscious innovation, and yet it was all part of this movement in the time. I mean, we think about the vernacular and we think about Luther and how he insisted upon that, and rightly so. But the movement had already started, you see, because of course Dante was among the first in his time to really create the language that is spoken in Italy today. That is to say, to fix it in a textual form and in a poetic form. So, you know, it's not like Chaucer. He's writing too, right? But the kind of English he was writing is not as smoothly continual or intelligible anymore. Whereas here, you know, you see the template, and you can, you know, also the proximity to Latin, and the Latin being, of course, you're quite right, people were shut out from the Latin, you know, but then of course Latin was the language of learning. So if you wanted to learn, you could. Don't forget that the churches were the first, you know, houses for learning. The monasteries gave rise to the first universities. So I don't think it's quite appropriate to bash the church as withholding when the church was, you know, like such a huge pillar of the society that it enabled certainly as much as it perhaps disabled. All right, I mean, I'm just thinking about the lives of women.
Yeah, and the many, well, I guess the Franciscans
to have a life of the mind or a life of learning in a monastic community than they could in ancient Greece. All right, ancient Greece, I just feel was a horrific nightmare for women. That's because of a wonderful scholar I read, Eva Coyle's The Reign of the Phallus, which really put all of that very much in perspective for me and made me grateful for this leaving behind of pagan thinking, because pagan thinking well, I don't want to get distracted, but the vernacular, in other words, very important movement that was already happening and continue to grow. You see, and 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 the whole kind of organic beauty of custom and of color and flavor and insight and like folk wisdom. I mean, all those extraordinary indelible things that come with the language, a vernacular language that again give the richness to this poem. That when you read Inferno in the original, you'll notice that the language itself is spitting and snarling and ugly. I mean, there's so much harsh syllables and assonance and the language itself, in other words, the further down you get to Canto 33, Canto 34, the uglier and more horrible the sound of the language is. And that could only have been done in the vernacular, I think.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Good. Yeah, I actually would just put one thing out, and it's so interesting and useful to look at history from the standpoint of the emancipation of women and the I know as a guy I've often taken for granted most of human civilization has tended to treat women as if they didn't have a soul. You're just vessels to carry babies, and not befitting even of having the right to read or we take things like that for granted. And also, I don't know if you saw the movie Agora from 2009 with Rachel Weisz, but it was interesting that
yeah, I've heard about it. Yeah, I haven't seen it. Is it any good?
It's very good. It's strikingly good for a modern movie. It's anomalously good, and yeah, it introduced a real character who was one of many women, apparently, in Plato's Academy. And that was the first time women were actually encouraged to be teachers in astronomy and mathematics. And she was one of them. And she's sort of the main character of that film. But yeah, it wasn't an easy, smooth transition. It's been an ongoing, millennial battle to actually recognize our value as being more than just our gender or skin color, but rather in our soul and our minds, which is still ongoing. But yeah, so I just want to plug Agora. It's a really good movie.
Okay, consider it plugged.
Cool. Paula and I think Cynthia, then we'll close it out at that point. So Paula, if you're still there, you can throw out your question.
I see she's written.
My microphone is not working. I can hear you, but I can't talk. So sorry about. Well, I apologize. I also was cut in the time difference mismatch, so to speak. But thank you very much for the very obviously I'm Italian, and I had to be inflicted the pain of reading Dante because unfortunately in school it's not really taught in the way to make it interesting, but it's almost like a punishment, unfortunately.
Oh, that's too bad.
I know, yeah. And also we are very young. We start reading Dante when we are 12, 13. But anyway, recently...
Where is this?
Italy, because I'm Italian.
Oh, Italy. Oh, wow. Gee.
So it has been part of my growing up. But recently, by contrast, by an Italian who I might struggle, but maybe I remember the name. I heard a lecture giving a reading of the whole Divina Commedia as a Masonic d'œuvre, excuse me, ouvrage. And of course, this is an initiatic journey. So it's a journey through life, but it's done to mark the transition from ordinary life to an elected life. However, unfortunately, I remember very little of it. I do remember that it was extremely interesting. And by the way, someone asked earlier on why Beatrice was a why Beatrice in the paradise, and that reading of the Divine Comedy, they gave an interpretation which unfortunately I've forgotten. Someone else asked about whether Dante was being represented by Beatrice, and there again I remember this lecture. So sorry about this long premise. All what I wanted to ask you was whether you ever heard that Divina Commedia can be interpreted as a Masonic ouvrage. Excuse me, I can't think of the word. And you know what do you think?
Oh, wow. No, I've never heard of that Masonic connection.
He was a Mason. He was a Mason, but not at the time. All intellectuals were. You know, it doesn't mean that we're, of course.
Yeah, you mean in terms of the secret society and
no, that it wasn't. It didn't
secret
have
handshake,
that.
you know, that kind of Mason. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. It makes me have like Freemasonry, but not that, not that criminal groups. No, not at all. It was belonging to Masonry, was belonging to a certain intellectual elite, and carrying all a message of respect for humanity, of respect for the church. It was a completely different society, so to speak, but still a society with
well, I'd be very fascinated to learn more, because I would never have thought of making that connection. Since he's very Catholic, you know.
Absolutely.
I thought there was certainly just enough imbroglios and secret stuff going on in the Vatican. I didn't think you'd have to go look at Masons as well.
Okay, listen, I'm going to try and look for that. I'm going to try and look for that. Maybe,
it's all really foreign to me, so I find it probably very entertaining and interesting. So yeah, you can tell me about it.
I'm going to try and look for that.
Paula, I'll send you Maya's email, Paula, so you can send her.
Okay, because I was thinking otherwise of putting that in the note when this lecture get published.
Sure.
Something like that.
Send it to me, and Maya will have a look at it. All right.
Okay. That's okay for
all
sure.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. I'm sorry it was a punishment.
No, that's very interesting that you actually being Italian it's very valuable that you said that. I hadn't realized, I took it for granted as well that the Italians, I was thinking what a great pleasure it must be to read in the original Italian. And no, the fact that
a lot of lines have been memorized, you know, it's part of the national memory, isn't it? I mean, hundreds of lines incised on the national memory bear witness to that lapidary power of the Commedia. That's just one comment that I've, among many. I'm not Italian either, but I imagine, I mean, I've heard people quote it, you know, sort of, lasciate speranza, you know, right. So I mean, how can you not quote it? It's so perfectly fitting for so many situations. So, and there are others like this, like, you know, in His will is our peace, right? In paradise. So I mean, there are lots of lovely lines, and because they're poetic, I think they lend themselves to remembering in a happy way, hopefully.
Well, I think that's sort of it's a miracle, and it's a testament to the enduring quality of Dante's power and genius, that even in times of spiritual decay, his ideas can still persevere, despite the fact that too many people are not able to appreciate them because they're resonating to something else in times of decay in society, right? But the fact that he still has been able to endure beyond all of these ups and downs in the last 700 years, including our own,
absolutely,
is very interesting. Whereas a lot of other people who are probably equally, if not maybe more popular as poets in the particular age that he lived in, we've forgotten who many of those were, but there's something in the quality of his compositions that still, like you said, just endure.
It's a similar problem to Our World for Shakespeare.
Right.
I mean, the British are obviously an entirely different relationship. They still take it much more seriously. But for us in like Canada or the United States, it's compulsory to learn Shakespeare in high school typically, but the teacher is usually extremely underqualified to teach it. And as a teenager, you know, you're used to a very lower level speaking of the language, and then you just go right into Shakespeare, you're not going to be understanding most of it, and you're going to be, you need a teacher to guide you through it. So if the teacher doesn't know how to do it, no matter how beautiful the language is, as a teenager, you're not able to actually understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I would just say that, you know, Shakespeare is England's gift to the world, just as Dante is Italy's gift to the world, and, you know, Cervantes is Spain's gift to the world, and you can just keep going. In other words,
And
it's
Schiller.
it's a gift. Yes, Schiller. Yes, yeah. So look, these are gifts that are ongoing and benefits from a good teacher, but also just ready for anyone to, when they're ready, to, you know, try discovering, I guess.
On that
The
note,
same night.
just to share an experience, having chatted with Maya in her office at Dawson a couple of years back, I was fortunate, I guess, to be there at a particular day when her students, who I think had participated in your Dante class, had been coming
That was
by
a
your
Don Quixote class.
Oh, it's
Don
Don Quixote
Quixote
class. Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember, but all that to say, so they had read Don Quixote with you, and they were bringing in their final papers and getting some remarks from you. And I just had a chance to listen to a few of these kids come by and just say that the experience in your class was a life-changing experience. And just hearing 19-year-olds say that was a joy. It was really, so I think they lucked out by getting you as a teacher of these classics.
Oh, well, it's a great pleasure and a privilege. I feel the honor is, you know, is due to them, due to the students.
I just want to make
and the
one
material,
last...
of course. Thank you.
Satomi, you want to sneak in a
no,
comment
I just,
there?
oh, well, of course, I missed this thing because of the time. I forgot. So I will catch you recording, but it sounds like it was a great session. But I just wanted to say, I heard that, you know, as Shakespeare is to tragedy, you know, Dante is to comedy. And like
comedy,
really, Jesus, the Bible is that's the only way sometimes you can really bring so much truth to light.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. What a beautiful way you put it. Yes. Thank you.
Cynthia, did you want to throw out your last thought question before we round it off for tonight?
Yes, I probably shouldn't have been the last question, but it's part a comment. So I'll start with a comment. I think that you know, what you brought up about Dante not being able to read Greek is so important for people to understand, with Dante being such a leader in not just poetry, but interestingly, you know, he has a lot of references to do with the sciences too. But Virgil being picked as the guide, I find is telling in many ways, right? And Virgil, of course, can't enter paradise with Dante because he wasn't a Christian. But also, I think Virgil is Dante's guide to the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, because so much of it was lost. And to my understanding, Plato was not available to Dante during this time. As you mentioned, it was the Islamic Renaissance that saved Plato, which I think is very telling, because I don't think it's a coincidence that Plato became obscure during this period of you could say there was a dark age period in terms of what people had accessible to them in terms of great reading material. And, you know, Plato, as you mentioned, reason is a main theme in the Divine Comedy. It's not just, you know, the relationship with God, but that reason can is part of that guidance. And so it's interesting that, you know, Dante put the Greek philosophers in the Inferno, but they had a completely different experience than everybody else, which was that they were surrounded by a beautiful green patch. And they had, like, you know, they were in their own like little kind of a domain of a mini kind of lower, level paradise, waiting for, judgment day, where then they would enter paradise. And I think that it is interesting that Socrates and Plato, they do mention God in the singular, and I think that they were along that path. They weren't in opposition to it. And I guess my question for you is that when I was reading the Divine Comedy, it was so difficult, not just because of the historical references that I wasn't aware of, but he has so many references to astronomy. And I was lucky. I've not read the translation that you've suggested, but I was entirely reliant on this other translator's footnotes to explain the astronomical references that Dante has, because it's so central to everything he's talking about. So like, to understand this like perfection of God, he really, I think, was heavily using the perfection of the universe and talking about astronomy in communicating this. How do you think that I don't want to say the average person, but like his audience, his who he thought he was going to be communicating to, how would they be able to receive that? And why do you think that he focused on it so heavily? Like, you had to really have some kind of understanding in order to get any of the poetry even that he was writing down.
Well, again, I have to reiterate that the medieval reader was much more sophisticated than the modern one. I can't emphasize enough, I think, how much patience with complexity we've lost, and just easy access to a sense of heaven and earth being connected. Okay, there's a kind of organic understanding of man and the cosmos. Like ever since Descartes, we've had this kind of rupture of the human being at the center suddenly, and the ancient world didn't think that way. The medieval world didn't think that way, and so your question is kind of leaning in that direction, saying, it's so hard for us to connect to this, but in fact, to look up at the sky regularly and to understand that like I read to you from the Vita Nuova, he's referring to a position of the heaven, at this certain time, and that this had a significance. It is astronomical. It's a Ptolemaic model of the universe that endured for thousands of years until Copernicus, right? So now people look at paradise, the idea of how the medievals understood the world in relation to their planets and so on, and they think it's very charmingly misguided, but it was supported very much by science, and people were aware of the applied science. They didn't have so many mediators in between, like you can only imagine that there's these are the same people who built cathedrals. I'm not saying all of them, and you're talking about the common reader, but like, who is the common reader? It's a reflection. Everything is of a piece, and that idea of understanding, how it seems to me that it was not abstruse at all. It was very applied. It strikes me as very, very much a way of understanding time and understanding place. It was integral to medieval experience, because it was slower, because it was more attuned with the whole idea of God. It was patient. It was also suffering a lot, because of privations and inequalities, and like, you can fill in as much as you can try at this vast distance. But I'm only filled with respect for this really impressive sensitivity to the world and the cosmos. There's a wonderful, they don't make scholarship like this anymore, but again, Sayers, in her wonderful translations, in Purgatorio, she has actually a little like it's called a timepiece that the reader can cut out and assemble and use as a kind of bookmark that will move to tell the time in relation to the different astronomical constellations as they move through the sky
really?
throughout the day and the night. Yes, and they show the relationship between Jerusalem and the antipodes on the other side of the world, somewhere in the southern hemisphere, where purgatory is. And then there's these other, cardinal points and other points of the globe, all in relation. In other words, this in itself, this little, sometimes I have the students just do this little craft project because it's in itself so revealing. It shows at a glance how, yes, it's not like rocket science. It's not impossible to understand. It's very pragmatic application of heaven and earth interrelationship, which, how many of us in urban Montreal look up at the sky? Come on. How many of us are sensitized to, we're all unfortunately glued to devices or we're, we're anxious about other things but I'm talking about a kind of groundedness that, we could try to regain a little more often, and it's not so hard. It's not so hard.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
This was great, Maya. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insight in your work.
No. Wisdom, Book of Wisdom is not me.
Right. Thank you for being a conduit for the wisdom of others. And you've given us a lot of homework to do. I have got a lot of reading to do. I think everyone's thinking of the same thing. Next week, we're going to have, we're going to meet back same time, Sunday, 2 p.m. for a lecture on Percy Shelley's Poets as the Legislatures of the World thesis at the end of his In Defense of Poetry by Daniel Leach. So that'll be an exposition of his poetry, his life, and that very important essay, which we'll be reading in our reading group, and I think in about 3 weeks' time in more fully. So if people do want to participate in the reading group, currently we're reading Schiller once a week, his Universal History lectures on Wednesdays. Just send us an email at info@risingtidefoundation.net or the upcoming Shelley essay as well. But otherwise, hope to see everyone here next Sunday at 2 p.m. Bring your friends. And Maya, once again, thank you enormously.
Grazie, arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Ciao a tutti.